Hello, hello. Tonight we do some modular drums. That is drum sounds sequenced from the synthesizer.com Modular in this case. There are so many ways of creating drum sounds, percussion sounds with a modular synth. This is one. I'm using a sequencer, and then I'm using white noise and pink noise to generate the percussion sounds. Of course, you don't have to do that. You can use oscillators, whatever you want, but this is one way of creating percussion with a modular synthesizer. Alright, let's listen to an example of what the modular drums can do. I'm just going to start a pattern and then I'm going to explain what I'm doing here. And it's your typical modular sound, a typical analog sound for percussion. This example I'm using a Q119 sequencer in 3x8 mode. So this row of 8 knobs control the bass drum, this one controls the snare drum, and this one triggers the hi-hat. And you can change the oscillator rate to slow the tempo down or make it faster as such. You can also change the voltages on the individual knobs to change and vary the patterns themselves. For instance, on the bass drum, and of course you can do exactly the same thing on the snare drum. This one is in 1/8 tempo. If you slow it down and change the position of the bass drum and snare drum, you can get a 16th note type of vibe as doing this. So instead of having the bass drum every other quarter here, you do something like this. Plug it on the first here. And now you have a repeating 16th note example instead of 8, and you can speed it up or slow it down again with the rates. It's more like an industrial dance type of vibe. You can increase the tempo and get that typical 90s style. With this type of analog synthesis, just by tweaking very minimally on the envelopes, you can drastically change the sounds. And speaking of which, let's take a look at how these sounds are constructed. It's very simple. Basically, I have these gates here, and they all go to envelopes here for filter and amplifier of the bass drum, and filter and amplifier of the snare drum, and then there's a straight gate for the hi-hat. So let's try to change the gate of the hi-hat. Same thing with the gate for the snare drum. Just by acting on the decay and release, you can drastically change the sound of the snare drum, for example. And of course, you can also change the filters. And on the bass drum filter, you can make it larger. Or smaller. And again, as far as the patch, is very simple. You got gates going to the gate inputs of the envelope generators, very straightforward, like all sequencers do. And then I got this noise panel here, and I'm using the white noise that goes to a mixer here for the snare drum, and then the pink noise for the bass drum that goes here. The hi-hat is just gated to the same noise that I'm using for the snare drum. So it's very, very simple patch. And there are two envelope generators for each sound. This is the envelope generator for the filter for the bass drum, and this is the envelope generator for the amplifier for the bass drum. Filter envelope for the snare and hat, and amp envelope for the snare and hat, and then they go to a mixer. Very simple patch, and it's all driven by this Q119 synthesizers. Also, I have it connected to, you can't say, but it's up there, it's a Q960 sequencer. And if you want, I didn't run the cables, but you can also program